Welcome to Drive Time, the UCLA Anderson podcast. My name is Dylan Stafford. We're going to share some success. Today's guest is Jason McBride. He is a almost brand new alum. He's going to graduate here in a few months. He's part of the class of 2025. Before UCLA Anderson, he came in the door thinking he was either going to be a person who switched careers or maybe become an entrepreneur. And you're going to hear his story today. Walking out the door, very much aimed at entrepreneurship. He did the all-day Saturday schedule. He's married, 2 children, 4 and 2. So FEMBA is a 3-year program. So one of those might have arrived. Do the math. Georgia Tech undergrad engineering, spent a decade doing the Silicon Valley thing. You're going to hear all about that. Jason, thanks for being here today.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. I got to meet Jason last December at the final presentations for the Capstone, the big weekend where Global Access Program and the Business Creation Program, where all of our capstones are delivering 6 months of work. And why I really am excited to get to interview Jason participated in a pilot called the Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition Capstone. It's not even fully rolled out yet. It was very experimental, very, very forward looking, and it's part of his journey. You're going to hear about that in the middle third. But and then the last thing, can't judge a book by a cover. Remember that when you come to a place like UCLA. Born and raised in Nepal, moved to the US at the age of 17. So you have to stay to the very end to hear that part of Jason's story. So Jason, again, thank you.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, this is fun. So here you are, getting ready to graduate. You're looking at buying a business. So you got the MBA. A lot of the folks that I'm going to share this to, they've been admitted. And now it's like, oh my gosh, am I going to pay the deposit? Am I really going to do this thing? It's kind of pricey. People get a little bit sticker shock. You think an MBA is one thing when it's a nice idea, then when it's really real. So let's just start with, where are you walking towards graduation, walking out the door? What's next for you? How did the MBA help you get there? Let's go. Let's start at the end.
Sure. Coming into the program, I actually had a big idea that I was working on. It was a longer gestational period kind of company. This wasn't a startup per se. Having been in the Bay Area, obviously you're immersed in that whole ethos. Everyone's trying to do a startup. Yeah. Half the time, that's why you're there anyways. That's why I went to the Bay Area. And I got to be in one of the early Y Combinator companies, which carried a lot of credibility, gave me a taste of the game, but spent most of my time in big enterprise companies. And the advantage of that stability, in addition to being able to get married and have kids and start a family, was that it gave me a runway to try ideas that maybe other people didn't have, where they're more tempted to try ideas that could hit the ground running with immediately, right out of college. They're young, things of that nature. So
20 years old, let's take the Moonshots, right?
So yeah. I did the Moonshot, and it was exceptionally rewarding, and I recommend everyone who's got an opportunity to do that, because there's a really quick feedback loop to being in a very small company. You get to make decisions, and if they're wrong, you find out really fast, and it's really painful. And that pain, that feedback, I think promotes a lot of growth. So I was very partial to that, and I would say that that's the only entrepreneurship model that I was aware of, other than maybe being an Uber driver or something of that sort. So I'd been working on that path with an idea, and the short of it is I actually think I could solve water for the entire Southwest. I think we have an abundance of water. I just don't think most people know where to look. And being an engineer, it was a problem that, it comes up in California. If you live here long enough, eventually you live through a drought and you got to take short showers.
We're 10 days past the wildfires. So, water's been in the news the last 2 weeks here in LA specifically.
Right. And so it was a problem that I've been working on in advance because of the drought. And yes, a lot of our problems seem to just be symptoms of a shortage of water. And whereas a lot of people look to the news or surface level solutions, as an engineer, you're trained to decompose the problem, go searching. Where does the data tell you the problem is? And through that hunt, found out there's an enormous amount of water, 85% of it. It's in the farms. The farms are in the desert. They use 10 times more water per acre than anywhere else in the world. So you don't see it because it doesn't sit there. When they spray and flood the farms, it just gets evaporated off and disappears into the atmosphere. So, you drive past the farms, you see lush green fields. I drive past the farms and I see the 10 feet of water per year that they have to submerge those fields in to get that greenery.
Okay.
So that was a problem that I've been working on, and went through a process with the state of California, submitted a proposal, went through multiple rounds, was a multi-million-dollar study. And so coming into UCLA, this was a chance to accelerate that. I already came in with an idea, but I was very open if there were better ones. Some of these ideas, they take time, and maybe I could lay the first brick in that road, but it's someone else's to build. So I wasn't really sure. It was, UCLA to me represents kind of, it's the temple of capitalism. The priestly class where you anoint the future leaders, and a university like Anderson with very high standards, a huge part of the value is the people you put us next to. That, creating that critical mass of people who are motivated, have put in the work to prove themselves, and are there and hungry. And to me, that was something I wanted to take advantage of. And I brought an idea right into that mix, hoping that there'd be people who'd be excited about it and we could hit the ground running. And then if things evolve from there, so be it. But I wanted to make sure that I took that shot where it counted.
Excellent. And, so talk about your classmates,
Sure.
How did, because you've alluded to it, the people who are left and right of you. So how did, just help people understand, what, without saying names, but
Sure.
yeah, some broad strokes, like what were the buckets of classmates, if there were there categories, is there kind of one Anderson archetype, or is it very varied?
Sure. So I think a lot of people will have a very superficial way of looking at programs. You go on Google, top programs, MBA, and you go through ranks and lists. But honestly, I think that just completely collapses and crushes the variety and just the richness each program offers. And I had this model in my head. When I went to Georgia Tech, for example, I had friends who went to other universities, and you'd go to their career fairs. Good universities. My friends were just as smart as me, probably smarter. But I went to the Georgia Tech career fair, and all the top companies were there. At the time, Siemens, Motorola, Apple, Microsoft, you name it. It was truly an engineer's dream. And then you go to these other universities, and they would have much slimmer pickings. They would be smaller, regional. And the only way I got to California, I would not have made it out to California had I not been at Georgia Tech. To me, I see a university for a young person as an airport. There's major hubs, and then there's smaller spokes. And to me, that airport, the question I would ask people to ask themselves is, well, where do you want to go? Do you want to go to the Bahamas, or do you want to go to New York City? And, I describe Harvard. Harvard's going to matriculate people into its local industry. So if you wanted to get into finance, maybe that's a really good stop. And if you want to get into tech, the West Coast. You've got UCLA as a major anchor and a hub. And you've got North California, South California. I lived in the Bay Area, worked there for 10 years. It's very anchored to software. It used to be very much around computer hardware, but a lot of that it's shifted as the new tech giants have taken over. And to me, having worked in hardware, I had a soft spot for hard problems, hard tech as they call it. And UCLA was my next airport destination. I came as a kid from Atlanta who didn't have a clue where to go in California or what to do. Right. They got me that flight cross country, and UCLA, being a university here in LA, it was a chance to access the richness of the local industry and the people here. So we've got people from defense, Raytheon, JPL, aerospace. We've got people from what you would expect, Hollywood, media, Disney down the street. And then we've got people from Southern California, San Diego, big military town. So we have a lot of people who are ex-military have done amazing things and working on that next journey in their leg of their personal journey. And then a variety of all other industries. I think everything's represented in LA. It's the city here has got more people as a population than entire states. So I don't think if you came to LA, you wouldn't find what you're looking for.
Nice. Yeah. No company can afford to have the diversity of employees that we have in our student body. And yes. I mean, we have people from the Bay Area, San Diego, we have out-of-state students, but LA County has 10 million people, making it the 10th largest state in America. This county is bigger than 40 of the 50 states. It's mind-boggling. So did you get what you hoped for with the other perspectives of your classmates?
I did. It's very enriching. A big part of a university like this, I think a big part of an MBA program is the fact that you get that broad access that I don't think any other educational domain will provide. So being an engineer, you pick a silo and you work in that. You end up in a company, especially as an individual contributor, you're working on your problem. You often don't. If you're a mechanical engineer, you're not likely to be interfacing with the finance department very often.
Right. Yeah.
Or other departments, as an example.
You're going to be siloed in your functional area.
And the bigger the company, the more siloed you get. And so especially if you're in a big company, it can be very hard as you move up the ladder to ever gain the experience you need as a manager, people manager, program manager, any cross-functional role where you may need to know what's in the other silo. And I think in that environment, an MBA is, to me, extraordinarily valuable. So I had a good career, and I ended up building out a team under me as we had success in the role that I occupied in the company that I was in last. And I can learn through experience, but that's the school of hard knocks.
Yeah. And there's only so many years in a working career.
Right.
Could we accelerate that a little bit?
And it can be hard to learn in a corporate environment sometimes because they've got their jobs. I can't sit there and plug their brain for what I need to know to learn on my end of this, on my role and what I need to know about their job. And so an MBA was a way to professionalize that, to take it seriously, to turn over that leave no stone unturned. And there are people here who now I know when I have a problem, I don't have to dial a legal firm anymore. I have a name and a friend and a phone number that I can actually call, and we chat about these problems and we reciprocate. And the one thing I really liked about Anderson is the fact that maybe this is a function of California. We're much less closed off. We don't keep things as close to the chest as perhaps other business cultures or other areas do. I think people are very accessible, and that's been very useful personally. So it's been very useful professionally and very helpful and nice as an experience personally.
Yeah. Who's in your LinkedIn now after earning a working professional MBA at UCLA that wasn't in your, so sounds like maybe someone with a little legal expertise is now in your Rolodex. Yeah. It's handy to know a doctor. It's handy to know a lawyer. It's handy to know a good accountant. Every business professional is becoming the CEO of their own life, and you want to have trusted advisors.
And that's something I think, for me, having done entrepreneurship, been in entrepreneurship, taking shots at it, working on now my own idea, the one for water that I think could be pretty transformational if it takes off.
Yeah. Let's make water accessible in Southern California.
Right.
Whoa.
I think people assume that perhaps MBA is better suited to being, it's like officer training for the leadership core of big companies, big organizations. But I think that breadth is very applicable to being an entrepreneur. And part of the reason why is because as an entrepreneur, you're presented with having to manage and step in all those roles a lot of times, especially as a founder. And so being able to understand and speak that language, I think, is very helpful for being able to navigate fast. And especially in startup where you don't want to spend your entire time learning because you got to make pretty fast ground. I think having those skill sets in your back pocket, and even knowing, for instance, if you were to build out your org, who to hire, where to hire, what it looks like for each role, what good looks like. I think universities like UCLA, to me, set, in my mind, a bar high for what good looks like. And that, to me, is hugely useful, I think, going forward.
Oh, I love it. All right. So we're telling the story. As you can tell, we're sort of telling it in reverse order. So you're hearing a little bit about what Jason's looking at going forward. Let's talk about what happened the last 2 years and change, almost 3 years here. And we're going to focus on your capstone. We have the Global Access Program. 75% of people do that. And then we have the business creation option. A smaller group of people do that. And then within that, we have this pilot, the Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition pathway, which is a whole other way. It's not the 20-year-old moonshot, build it in my own garage. It's not the, Zuckerberg, what you saw in the movies. It's not that. It's a different way. And to find opportunities, to bring your managerial expertise to those opportunities, to change the rhythm. You've got a chart. We're going to put a chart up here in a moment. So we're about to hear Professor McBride, which is back to learning from your classmates. But you want to bring that up. Let's walk people through what Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition is. Tell us the value proposition as you see it. Maybe juxtapose that against some of those school of hard knocks lessons you learned a decade doing it the hard way in the Bay Area.
Sure. in the Bay Area, the model there is startups. They've got a whole venture capital ecosystem built out. A lot of other parts of the country are trying to emulate that model.
Yes, Silicon Valley, Silicon River,
Yeah.
Silicon Beach, Silicon Plateau. Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, I thought that same way, especially going to the Bay Area, especially being young, getting into Y Combinator. You're kind of drilled with that being the way.
Right.
It was a pleasant surprise to me coming to UCLA, meeting people who had different backgrounds. I had a somewhat unique business problem that I was attempting to solve. And it wasn't suitable for startups, not as well as perhaps software startups.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of reasons for that. Took a little longer to solve, and venture capital money, they've got a requirement for when they've got to return their capital.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got 7 to 10 years. They need to see certain milestones along that way for them to feel that this is making progress. They've got their KPIs. The whole thing is structured like a well-oiled machine. But when you optimize something, it gets good for that, but there's things you lose. And that's just one example where I came here and got 3 different paths that we discovered along the way. And I would call them paths or toolkits.
Mm-hmm.
Often entrepreneurs are motivated by solving a problem. And when you think about how to solve that, there's multiple ways. And access to capital is a big component of that, because a lot of times we come up with there's a problem and an idea we want to solve, put our time into it. But for something to scale, you need funding.
Mm-hmm.
And I would describe startups as the really extreme fast growth that's suitable to things that can grow fast, like software. That often biases them against committing a lot of money to capital intensive industries. Why? Because if you have to put in a lot of plant and equipment, that's like an anchor around you. It slows you down. And it requires longer duration investments, and it increases some of the risk, and just perception wise, as well as what a lot of the VCs have gotten used to, it doesn't suit their model. You've got private equity firms where they come in, they'll often work and buy smaller companies, and they're in the buy mode. So I'd say there's 2 paths, which is build versus buy. And they often have good sources of funding. They often bring in debt. So they call it the leveraged buyout model, LBO, where they can juice their returns. They can get really big companies, take them over using debt. But that's suitable to companies that can pay the debt, that can pay the bills.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need cash flows. So for a startup, you don't need cash flows. For a leveraged buyout, you do. And that really affects your journey as an entrepreneur, because I would say as a startup, you start with 100% control. It's your idea. And then you're selling it down. You're selling ownership of your company down in order to get the cash you need to take this thing to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
And they do require you to go to the moon.
Yes, it's not optional.
Yeah.
You make a deal.
So if you hit it, it's awesome, and those are the stories we hear, but there is a high failure rate too. And I was part of a startup that we were doing awesome until we weren't.
Yeah.
And we were doing food delivery. And so we had software layer, but we also had some of those impairments. And that's sort of what sensitized me to the constraints of that model. We were delivering real food. It was basically Uber Eats.
Mm-hmm.
Travis Kalanick, actually, funny story, wanted to buy the company, and then the CTO basically told him, food's a bigger market than transportation. We'll buy you one day.
Oops.
Uber Eats got launched, and obviously we know who won that battle. I don't know if we were the direct cause of Uber Eats being launched, but clearly he was poking around in that space.
Yeah.
And so it became hard, because when you hit bumps in the road, venture capital money is not very patient.
Yeah.
And there's tons of young kids and other ideas out there to fund. And it can be very thematic. So Uber for X was a really popular idea, and then suddenly something else comes out and everyone hears that. And I think that's where at UCLA, to me, this was the unexpected pleasant surprise that I had hoped to get. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know you don't know by definition what a surprise is going to be. Otherwise it wouldn't be a surprise. And when I came to UCLA,
I love the engineering mindset. It's so logical. Yes.
Yeah.
I never broke it down like that. But yeah, if you know with the punchline, it's not a joke.
Right.
If you know what's going to happen, it's not a surprise. And you're alluding to those happy accidents is another phrase. Yep. Because this person plus this person plus this person physically come to UCLA, get to know each other. Mm-hmm. 1 + 1 is 3. You can create additional unexpected results. Mm-hmm. And ETA was that for you.
Yep.
It was, you called it earlier, an unexpected nugget. I like that.
Yeah, it was an unexpected nugget at UCLA that, to be honest, what I'd hoped to find at a program like UCLA was that what my life looked like afterwards would have been on a totally different trajectory that I never would have been on had I not been here.
Okay. Yeah.
And some people use it as an accelerant to their path in life, but I like surprises.
Okay.
And that's half of the value, I think, of being in such a unique environment with people from so many different backgrounds, so many different disciplines, so many different ideas. And in entrepreneurship, you know, they usually say, do you want to be rich or do you want to be king? Use king for debt. Use, because then you own the company. Use equity for capital. You get that fast growth. You can be rich, but you're not going to be king. And it's a bit of a binary way to frame it. But then in that world, I stumbled across Kent Weaver's class here at UCLA. And that was a real pleasant surprise because I had never heard of a thing called search funds. And search funds has become a bit more professionalized in the last 5 to 10 years. And I think there's reasons related to that around capital costs. We had a 15-year period of pretty much 0% interest rates. So all the money went to the riskiest locations and to the riskiest ventures. So startups are pretty much exactly that. That might be what's driving the dynamic and the change, but then you also have a lot of baby boomers retiring. There's a ton of businesses where we all went to college like our parents told us to in my generation, but then that left a lot of solid businesses with no one to inherit. And to me, Kent Weaver unlocked a new tool in the toolkit, which is if you want to get to an end goal, there's more than one way to do that.
Right.
And maybe instead of struggling and trying to find your first customer and burning all your money, maybe you could start on first base. You could buy a company and then take it from there. And you could hit the ground running because you've got cash flows. You've got already your early employees who know what they're doing. And so you don't have to spend your entire time. If you like the business culture, it's already pre-built for you. And you've got a customer base to grow from. It gives you, to me, it was a head start. And there was something unique about it too, in that it seemed uniquely suited to where I was at in my life stage, where I had an idea, but I also had constraints. Good ones.
Yeah, wife and children.
Right. And so the startup world, I knew what that entailed. I'd been through that. And I knew that when I took those checks, I knew what those checks would be asking of me in return. And it's entirely fair. It's a consensual agreement.
Yeah.
But that seemed very interesting as a new way to do it, and one that seemed uniquely fit to where I was in life. And had I not been at UCLA, I never would have come across this, to be honest. And even if I had come across it, it would have been an article. It would have been a piece of knowledge. I wouldn't have known how to take that first step on that journey. But being in a program like UCLA with professors like Kent Weaver, who he's run and done his own businesses, and Dan Nathanson, another professor, he was the professor we did our capstone under, the ETA journey, and he had also bought his own business. And so it was great to learn from people who actually had done it. Wow. And there's so much more richness to being able to interrogate them and their journey and their knowledge base than just going on Google. Right. I just feel like it's not very rich, and the insights that they could give us were relevant. So yeah, that was to me a really interesting discovery of a new way that a little bit nascent and emerging, but I don't think I would have found that. I stumbled across that had I never been at UCLA.
And, I don't want to leave people with the impression that that's the only thing that happened, but, we don't have all day. So wanted to, share a mountaintop moment or an unexpected outcome. And that's, for those of you who are joining us, my commitment with these interviews is to accelerate you writing the story you want to write. And a way to say it is plan your work your plan. There's too much at Anderson to do everything. By definition, this is an all-you-can-eat buffet. If you make an entree out of every offering, there's not enough hours in the day and you'll get a tummy ache. So, constraints are, economists understand constraints. You'll take economics quarter one. It's the foundational framework that capitalism is built upon, which is there's no such thing as a free lunch. So every Tuesday night, there are 3 things happening on campus, plus something on Zoom, and you can't do them all. So how to maximize Anderson? Plan your work your plan, but there's a third caveat, and plan your work your plan. Have a North Star. Walk in the door, here are the 3 things I want to accomplish. Boom, boom, boom. so people get a sense of who you are. Because what's your elevator pitch? Plan your work your plan, but then stay open-minded. Be willing to jump into the elective, well, that's got a neat title, to discover the whole world you didn't know existed beforehand. And these, you're in this discovery mode. I've applied, I've been admitted. Oh my gosh, I'm going. I'm admitted to Berkeley and USC and Anderson. Typical. I'm going to choose one of those three. Which one is the cultural fit for me? Which one is going to open the doors for me? And Anderson's not for everyone. That's not the point. The point is what's best for you. And this is a very mature place, is my observation. 2 decades watching people do the ridiculous challenge of keep a job, keep a personal life, and carve out time for school. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense on paper. You have to suspend reality to be a FEMBA student. But this is probably, depending on when we release this, you may be drive time number 100. Having listened to 100 people tell their story long form, a common theme I hear is servant leadership, is open-mindedness, is a definite direction, but also a learning humility. And I love the way you said it. It's not a surprise if I already know what's going to happen. So for those of you, I want Jason's story to help you write your story. Okay, great undergrad, gave a decade of the let's go for it. Fell in love. Oh, we got to remind them that your loved one your wife is a Bruin also. We got to throw that in before we get to the finish line. Starting a family, ready to shake up the snow globe though. It's like the end of our 20s, the beginning of our 30s. All right, that was real. 30s are cool, right? Different energy than my 20s. Got a few dings and dents, a little bit of experience. Actually, in your case, a lot of experience. But you're not a teenager. You're not 55, old man like me. It's like, what are these next 20 years going to look like? And maybe I want to pick my battles a little more. I want to sharpen my, want to have a little more of a scalpel, not just the brute force of I can work 80 hours a week because I'm single. That's great getting launched. But then we get a little bit more sophisticated. So time gets a little more precious. So a lot more happened in Jason's MBA here at UCLA. We focused on entrepreneurship through acquisition. That kind of culminated it. I want to tell people about you because you've got a cool backstory, but any other mountaintop moment, favorite faculty, shout out to a classmate, any other element of Anderson that you'd like to take this opportunity to let people know about?
Sure. This is an interesting mountaintop moment because it happened really early. It was the Foundations in Leadership course.
Okay, so orientation, kickoff.
It's orientation. They put you on a ropes course, a whole bunch of these games, and they seem like games at surface level. But I have a funny story on one of them where I really got the point of it, where it was the entire point of the game was that this was a trivial task at face value. They laid a bar on the ground, and we all had to across our fingers, and we had to lower it to the ground as a team.
Okay.
And it sounds very easy, right?
Gravity, yeah.
All of us are fresh into the program. Everyone had exceptional careers coming in, all type A. Everyone comes in, the killer. And then we're forced to be on a team. And then we see how it goes. And I couldn't help but laugh as this thing was going on because it's 10 or 15 of us in a row, all standing opposite each other.
If there's a punchline, don't give them away because they got to experience it themselves.
Right. It's true. So all trying to lower this thing and failing miserably at the simplest task. And the best part of it was everyone recognizes that this should have been a very simple task and we couldn't do it. And when you put together all the IQ that we had on that team, it still wasn't working. And I found it very entertaining because you could see everyone there were a lot of people, their personalities just start to come out as this goes on and we're all struggling and your team's losing and you can't figure out, like everyone's yelling at each other, trying to figure out, it was an interesting lesson to me on what got you here won't get you there.
Nice.
Where I thought it was a pretty apt metaphor for what I think an MBA represents, which is that we might be all individually incredibly successful, but when you mature in a team, in an organization, which is a team of teams, there's something to be learned in that journey. And so to me, it was a perfect setup for the program. So I found that a very entertaining introduction and kickoff.
I love it. A mountaintop moment, week one. Why not?
And then to appear, to give a sense of what I enjoyed about the program, and just a sense of the quality of the people that we collect here. On the water program, I was in a mixer and talking to people, trying to find people, what's your interest, get introduced to other people in the program, and met a guy who worked at AECOM. And AECOM, to people who aren't too familiar, is one of the biggest construction consulting firms in the US. And he's working on a big project in Los Angeles on the airport there. We get to talking, and we formed a good friendship through this program. And incredibly bright guy. He had served in the military, done tours overseas, and talking to his story. If anyone's ever seen the movie Hurt Locker, it's a bit of a dramatization, but this is this guy. So we get to talking one day, it's late, and we're working on a project, and so we just start talking about life, and the conversation trails off of the actual project.
Sometimes.
And we get to talking about his experience and stuff, and I said, you're a really calm and quiet guy. Are you always like this, or is it just because what you've been through, your adrenaline's set at this level and everything else, doesn't really rock you too much? And that opened up a story about his tours of duty, and then he asked me, he's like, how many bombs do you think I demined? So that was what he did at one point.
Wow.
I'm like, I don't know. We gotta be impressed with 10, right?
Yeah. What's a good answer to that? Enough that you're still here.
Right. And then I forget what the actual number was, but it was north of 200 in a single year. And wow, that blew my mind.
So you have a classmate who got paid to touch a bomb and make it not blow up, and he did that over 200 times.
And then he tells a story of how he was rolling into a town that the U.S. had apparently given up and lost, and it's out in the middle of the desert nowhere. And he won't tell these stories. He's too modest. So I'm doing him the favor, but yeah, he's driving in, and apparently he hits an IED out in the middle of the desert, shoots his coffee mug up and everything. And he tells that story so calmly, and he's like, "Oh yeah, we hit 4 of those on the way in." I'm like, 4 IEDs. He says, "Yep, absolute desert," and that was just the beginning. And that was one of his stories. And so I think that story encapsulates to me the beauty of the program too. A lot of people have stories that you have to get to know them to really uncap and appreciate. And there's a lot of depth to a lot of the people who get brought in here. And a lot of that is what creates that drive that we select for here at UCLA. And it's really interesting because it's also like a treasure hunt. Everyone's got their own story.
Yeah, our former dean, she talked about our share success culture. She said, we're not pointy elbows and sharp knees. It's not I win, you lose. And I think it's the California thing. I think we have a lot of people who are born in other countries. We have a lot of people, English is a second, third, fourth language. There's a humility about UCLA that's fascinating to me because I'm, of course, terrible. I'm from Texas. We're all 3 inches taller than we really are. Like tall tales, that's part of the, it's a good thing to be able to tell a tall tale.
Right.
But there's an understatement that's fascinating to me about, even though this is Tinseltown and pixie dust, but in the business community, I notice a lot of people, and again, having done 100 of these interviews, it's like pulling teeth to get people to brag. Like you'll tell his story, but he won't. But for you, you're choosing UCLA. You're gonna have a lot of military classmates. Maybe get curious, like, what's it like to be in the Navy? What's it like to be in the Army? What's it like to be in the Air Force? What's it like to be a Marine? Again, leaders get hungry, right? There's no one recipe. Every situation is unique and different. And I'm going to broaden. Jason's example, I walk in an engineer, masterful in the world of things, but I'm leaving here an MBA on top of an engineer. Now masterful in the world of people, process, technology, not only things, which makes you a triple, quadruple threat, which opens up your opportunity set, which makes the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and then the philanthropic generation, the legacy wealth, and what am I going to leave my grandkids, much more interesting for you.
And that's one thing I actually want to people who are thinking about an MBA or what value can I get out of it? What am I putting in? What's the ROI? I think a lot of the programs frame themselves, even the rankings, often they just look at what you do right after.
Right.
But to me, I think of an MBA, it really is, it's the one degree that I think compounds, and it's more valuable later in your career rather than earlier. Earlier in your career, you find yourself more as an individual contributor.
Yeah.
And so you don't always get to express those traits or that knowledge. And so I think measuring an MBA by just next day is the wrong measure. I think it's an investment in the long tail of your career, where
Mm-hmm.
hopefully, especially for people that's like for here, you hope to be a leader of organizations, projects, and teams. And then I think, to me, the richness grows with that. It gives you a base to build off of, and also the self-confidence, having established kind of that layer on top of your original skill set.
Mm-hmm. I love it. All right, we're not gonna take your whole afternoon. I got 3 things left, 2 written down here, and the third one I have to not forget. So, as we start to land the plane, just a little bit of personal stuff, just so you get it. This is an interesting human being. You get that, right? So, a little bit. One of the things I love about UCLA is we typically have 25 to 35 countries of birth outside of the United States, plus 30 or 40 states, right? This is a very international, cosmopolitan, US-wide citizenry of your classmates. You, I think, pretty sure, are the only member of the class of 2025 born in Nepal, and you lived in Nepal from 0 to 17. So you don't look Nepalese. Stereotype, so sorry, but you would be less. People wouldn't guess that in a trivia game and probably win. So tell a little bit about your background, before you came to the US at the age of 17.
Yeah, my background definitely informed a lot of my journey. It was very formative. I grew up, I was born and raised in Kathmandu, Nepal. While my parents were there, they were missionaries. And especially 30, 40 years ago, most of the people who lived there, who were expats, were usually there as missionaries, NGOs working for UN, organizations like that, building dams, infrastructure. So you had the Red Cross, and then you also had a lot of, I would say the third leg on that would be people working on behalf of other governments.
Okay.
And Nepal at the time was, I forget the stats. I think it might have been, there was some very large number about their budget being, in terms of totality, I think it was like 50% of the government's budget was basically foreign aid. When I grew up, when I was really, really young. And I got to observe a country play catch up and collapse 150 years of industrialization and modernization in the span of 15 years.
Yeah, in your childhood.
Right. And how that even impacted the culture, just from what was acceptable when I was a kid to when I graduated, massive shift as they plugged into the rest of the world and worked overtime to ingest a lot of the changes in what was out there. So yeah, that was sort of unusual. And I came to the US at 17.
How did you know it was time to leave?
So Nepal, when I was there, went through a communist insurgency. They called them Maoists because they imported a lot of their methodology from Mao Zedong, or at least inspiration. And the Chinese, of course, disavowed any association. And that civil war eventually started to capture the countrysides and work its way to the city core of Kathmandu. So most people, if you were expats, there wasn't going to be a future for you here in the country. You were there to help and aid, or work in some form or fashion with local industries, supporting, growing, etc. Or if you were local, there wasn't much of a future to be had at that time, at least in my graduating, I guess, era, years plus or minus. And so a lot of people who could would leave, and the younger people would go to the Middle East, would go to India to work in jobs there. The country was very fluent in English, partly because of tourism, the British heritage that they had with, I guess, the colonial era, and so that gave them access to other markets. And so most of the people who were my age, a lot of people who had the ability to, did leave. And so for myself, and I had a brother, my parents realized this was their life's work and their mission, but they wanted to give us a chance to kind of build our own path somewhere. So that's why we came back to the US. And then I definitely turned some heads. I had an accent that didn't match the face.
Tell people about your accent.
So my mom's German, my dad's American, and I went to an international school and lived in a country that spoke Nepalese, which very similar to Hindi. And so I was this really weird average of all
And
of those.
you moved to where when you came to the US?
I moved to Atlanta.
To Atlanta. Oh, well, there's no accent in the South.
Yeah.
I can attest to that, being Southern.
None at all.
That's the neutral, normal American accent we speak down there.
Right. So, it was pretty obvious I had to work on that accent because you spend your entire life explaining yourself, and at 16, 17, that's the last thing you want to do. I worked at Chick-fil-A, and I worked at the drive-thru where I got plenty of experience talking to people. So 3 to 4 months in, I had figured out how to drop the accent.
Really?
And, yeah.
That quickly.
Yeah, so me and my brother used to joke our objective was who could sound more American first.
Who could sound more American first? Wow.
So yeah, that was kind of how that was my introduction into U.S. back. I'd already graduated high school. I didn't even do high school in the U.S. So I worked at Chick-fil-A for a year or two, and then that motivated me to go to college.
I've lived in Mexico, Spain, and Germany, and I love to ask this question, of all of our, I don't ask it of everyone, but I love to ask it when I talk to people, like your pre-arrival stereotype of what America was going to be, so one stereotype confirmed and one stereotype, totally, wow, that's not it at all. Maybe anything, if you can go all the way back to when you got...
We had friends, because my parents were unusual in that they stayed in the country for a long time, especially if you were with the Red Cross organizations like that. It'd be a tour duty. You'd do 3, 4, 5 years, and then you would leave. And so there'd be this constant circulation. And I had some friends who had come from the U.S. And so my brother and I got them to give us the rundown. And I still remember this day. One of the guys just gave us, this is back with CDs, gave me the CD of Mean Girls.
Oh, the movie.
Yeah, and he said, "Well, he says this is American culture encapsulated in a nutshell." Because you're 17, and so that's
like a DVD.
Yeah, DVD. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misheard you.
So he gave me a DVD of Mean Girls, and we watched that, and that was.
This is like America High School and everything.
Right. So funny enough, because I grew up overseas, a lot of the culture that I got as what America was actually LA.
Oh, that's right.
It was Hollywood, and that was our window into America.
In Texas, same thing. You think it's Baywatch or whatever.
Right. And so to me, actually, when I got accepted to UCLA and came to UCLA, there was this romantic component to it, right? Where I had to pinch myself where I'm here.
There's palm trees. And
yeah. So even though I'd been in the Bay Area for 15 years, there was still that magical moment for me.
Yeah.
Which was kind of fun. And then on top of that, my wife being a Bruin, she actually, when she was an undergrad, she worked here in the complex. So when I got into UCLA, that was high five for both of us.
That's so cool. I mean, okay, good. Did she nudge you? Did she say, accept your Anderson offer?
Oh, I don't think there wasn't another option. I had to say yes.
You were aimed at Anderson. Okay, great.
Well, I mean, I had other options in that sense, but for my wife, there wasn't. It was just Anderson.
Right.
Once I got answers.
Harmonious home life. You had to come here.
That's
I respect and appreciate.
She had friends. So, when you're married, it's a joint decision and it has to work for both of us. And so in that sense, UCLA was great for me professionally. The reasons I said. I saw LA as creativity plus technology, and being in the Bay Area for 10 to 15 years, you just get a little stale being in the same place for a while, and you're iterating on the same ideas. The conversations are a little less interesting without a refresher because you're all talking to the same people, talking about the same companies, same ideas. So LA was great because to me it was a chance to do both, and I think innovation is a function of technology and creativity. So that was kind of my story to myself.
Well, yeah. And as you're listening, your story to yourself, like they're going to be, you did the all day Saturday section. They're going to be Saturday mornings, in February, it gets cold and nights are long and it's dark. They're going to be Saturday mornings where it's like, I don't want to drive to Westwood. So what is the famous Nietzsche quote? If I have a good why, I can withstand any how. Like, why am I doing this? And this white space, these months before school begins they're available precious real estate. This is bonus MBA. Because the stronger and clearer I start to articulate the why, the more solid my foundation, the more power I have to keep myself going, because it's a lot of energy to do this. So, all right.
And one thing I would add that I think to me was unique in that whole story, starting from that formative experience, was just watching as a country evolved what worked and what didn't work. And I really saw business as unique. It was a unique way to actually make true progress in the country, because you had federal government. The U.S. gives a lot of aid. A lot of countries would give well-intentioned aid, but unfortunately they would give it to a government, and so it comes tops down. And then what that does is it divorces the government from the people in the sense that the people aren't writing the checks, so they can't hold them accountable, and that actually had really perverse side effects. And then you had aid organizations, the UN, these big multinational, they were big NGOs that would come in. They would disperse, they would have their own priorities, but they wouldn't stick long enough to see the results. They weren't measured on their results. They would do some good, but they also had negative side effects.
Unintended consequences back to economics. You're going to be introduced to a way of thinking that helps you factor for externalities. And there's a humility with economics. There's a humility with scarcity. There's a humility with constraints that is enforced. Capitalism is a bear, like actually executed capitalism versus sort of government largesse.
Yeah, and I would say, markets can go south as well, especially if they're controlled and not free. And there's things to account for, I would say, but a lot of those other ways of affecting change in a country, the incentive worked against you a lot of times. And so I met and knew incredibly noble people. Yeah. But often they found themselves working in spite of their institutions, not really being pushed to the right directions because of their institutions. And my parents invested in businesses, and you could watch how that would actually give people autonomy. It would give them agency. When you're in charge of your own bread and butter, you can fund these ideas, right? If you can turn an idea into a profitable one, it's then sustainable. And if you have a good idea and you can make it profitable, well, then everyone will steal it from you, and it scales. And so those businesses were really, I saw how countries actually lifted themselves out of poverty in reality. And so that set me in motion when I went to Georgia Tech and I had options. You got all those degrees you could pick as you got in, all sorts of engineering. I did industrial and systems engineering because to me that was being a business engineer. That was taking a system I knew worked and learning how to work it. And the MBA to me was, in retrospect now, it seems like a very obvious conclusion to that arc, extension of that arc, where now I feel like I get to be in this place where I get the real big tools.
Oh my God, Jason, I could talk to you all day. I want to talk about microfinance. I want to talk about social entrepreneurship. I want to talk about homeboy industries here in LA, jails, not jobs, small wins, but anyway, we don't have time. So my last question, and this is hypothetical. Everything he's been telling you has been his story, but this is kind of a look ahead question. I love to ask this one also. You're going to walk across the stage pretty soon. You're going to launch this next chapter. Your wife is going to get her husband back, because you've been putting the time in. What do you think you're going to miss most?
I'm going to miss, it's really enriching to have professors on tap whenever you have real world problems.
Wow.
And so especially, I think working and doing the MBA was very enriching because you could learn not just the material, but you'd have real situations you could go pick their brains on. And it gave me a reason to tap into their experience and their knowledge base. So even though you're an alum, you always have access, made relationships with the professors, you're not in the same room weekly with that access. So I'll miss that. And so there's the faculty, the knowledge, their experience, and the faculty that I got to know, who I really appreciated being able to have access to, but then especially also the people you meet through the program. So you meet 100 people, but you really only keep, life's busy. You can only really keep in contact with the 3 or 4 that you most closely connected to, and where your journeys, I guess, intersect and join afterwards. So to me, that'll be something that I miss. I think university, I enjoy alternating between professional and then academic. And
I saw your slide. You're going to have to be an assistant adjunct. You got to come back and teach.
Hey, if that's an offer, I'll take it.
Hey, life is long. Life is long.
Right. But yeah, so I'll miss a lot of the people that I met along the way, both the staff here, the professors, as well as a lot of the peers that we got to know through the journey.
Well, fantastic. Well, this is Jason McBride, class of 2025. I hope you've enjoyed his story. Hope his sharing of his success informs you as you write your story, as you prepare for your success here. Last words are yours. Anything I should have asked you, I didn't. Anything you'd like to say? Thank you immensely for your generosity. But last words are yours, Jason.
Well, I don't know where this will lead, but being post the MBA, the pragmatic path, looking for really interesting jobs at companies here in LA. I've got a couple opportunities that, if they materialize, would be really exciting. And I wouldn't really ever have access to those opportunities had I not stopped here. But then also working on, again, I'm a big believer in capital markets when done right to solve problems. Because I think that's how, if you have a market, you can really allow people to profit from their own initiative. And on that trend, working on water, but also working on getting people access to the capital markets. I think, Robinhood, I'll say, it's a bit of a plug, but Robinhood democratized day trading. I'm not so sure that they democratized investing. And so a big question I had was, what if Warren Buffett built an app? what would that look like? And there's a lot of people who assume that getting plugged into the capital markets, being a capitalist, means Bloomberg terminals and Goldman Sachs and all that complexity, and it's anxiety inducing. And so we'll see where this goes, but I'm working on something I'd like to, in the long arc, create a way for people to be able to tap into that engine that we have in America, these amazing markets where these businesses are producing enormous value and spitting off all the rewards that come from having done a job done well. And I'd like to get more people plugged into that to actually reap the rewards rather than day trading against each other in this zero-sum game, where I think if people could see how it worked when done right, it would be a really exciting thing to plug people into and share success.
Yeah, arbitrage is fine, but actually creating value. Actually creating value.
And also for the companies, if everyone's a day trader plugging in, the companies themselves have a very unstable source of capital. Their share price is going up and down every day for inexplicable reasons, and it's got to be having been in public companies, it's not a fun thing to have to pay attention to. And there's a lot of people who give stable capital. Startups are an example. How many of these ideas are awesome, but unless you have a venture capitalist who's willing to take the risk and they get a return for it, it's a win-win for everybody. But they unlock incredible innovation that I think that uniquely happens here in California.
Well, Jason, thank you for your time. Hope this is a time capsule that you enjoy looking at 5 years from now. Like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to hear what happens. And just thank you. Thank you very much.
Appreciate the opportunity.
All right.